The English Language Center at the University of Bahrain is delighted to feature Mr. Ruben Salgado Escondero, who was a photographer and National Geographic explorer. He was born in Madrid, Spain, and he lived in the United States throughout his teenage years. He graduated from the Savannah College of Art and Design and later lived 10 years in Berlin. In 2014, Mr. Ruben moved to Myanmar to begin his photographic career, documenting the opening of a country which has been closed for over half a century. Ruben's works have been exhibited in over 20 cities worldwide, including New York, London, Tokyo, and Paris. He is a member of the Photo Society, a community of National Geographic magazine photographers. As an experienced lecturer, Mr. Ruben has given a TED talk in Beijing, a TEDx talk in Beijing, various talks worldwide for National Geographic Learning and other institutions such as Temple University of Tokyo and the Sony Gallery in New York City. His projects have been published in most major international publications, and he has won over a dozen international awards, including the Sony World Photography Award 2 years in a row, and the Picture of the Year Lantern. So it is our distinct pleasure to invite Mr. Ruben to share with us his insights. And sir, are you ready?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Thank you.
We can see your screen and you have the floor.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Well, firstly, I'd like to thank the University of Bahrain English Language Center, Dr. Garda and Abu Baker, and of course, National Geographic Learning for having me here today. Hopefully we can all meet under different circumstances in person. I would love to visit your country someday and hopefully can do this in person. So let's get started. So this is me as a little kid in Spain, where I grew up in the 1980s. That cheeky smile you see there, that's what I used to convince my mom to give me coins and run off to play arcade games with my best friend, Victor. That smile and the wink usually worked, but when it didn't, I'd still go to the arcade often and sit there for hours watching other people play. As a kid, I was interested in a lot of different things. I loved learning in school and generally liked studying. In fact, this sounds kind of nerdy, but I always wanted to get done with my homework as soon as I got home so that I could have the rest of the evening to have free to play with friends and especially video games. Art class was always my favorite. I loved drawing and creating my own fantasy worlds. Here's a drawing that I did of one of the games I was obsessed with at the time called Mega Man 2. The early 90s were a very exciting time for me. Video games were new and innovative, and they were just beginning to get fun. In a very short time, they went from looking like these big pixelated blobs to being like this. Watching these characters fly across the screen, I always asked myself, how do they do that? When I was 9 years old, my mother married my American stepfather, and we moved to Washington, D.C. to start a new life. When I arrived in America, I was so impressed by how big everything was. The colossal buildings, the avenues, even Coca-Cola bottles were twice the size as in Europe. I still remember the day I walked into Toys R Us. Now, for all of those who don't know what that is, it's a huge toy store the size of a football field. You can see it here on the picture. The video game aisle was the biggest I'd ever seen, and it was full of games that had not come out in Spain yet. Now remember, this was 1990, before the internet existed. So living in another continent in many ways was like living in a different world. And I found myself in a magical place that I didn't know that existed. I remember after being there for hours, my mother wanted to leave and I begged her if I could stay over and sleep the night in the store. Obviously, she didn't agree. And the thing is that actually at first, when I was in the US, school was pretty tough for me in America. You know, children can be really cruel, and I got picked on a lot. So I had to learn English very, very quickly. So I watched a lot of movies, read a lot of books, and played games in English. And in less than 1 year, I was doing all of my schoolwork in my new learned language. Here's a classic homework assignment where we were asked, what do you think your future will be like when you grow up? As you can read here, I said, my aspirations for the future are that I will be a video game maker. First, have to go to college and study a lot. I'd like to be in the basketball team. Being a video game maker is hard work. I'll get a lot of money and I'll have a wife and kids. It seemed that I had my future and my life really all figured out at a very early age. Then again, life is so simple when you're 10 years old, right? The next 15 years of my life were a pretty clear path for me, actually. I was in theater, I played sports, and always had good friends to spend time with. When I finished school, I got a scholarship which allowed me to study animation in Art University. And after graduating, I began a career in 3D animation. I was so excited to finally get out there into the real world and do and work what I had always dreamed of. I'm going to show you one of the first projects that I did when I was starting out. So for those who didn't understand, that was in German, because right after college, I moved to Berlin and began working in a small startup animation studio. After 6 years of trying to get my bearings in another culture and working my butt off, spending countless hours in front of the computer, I moved on to become lead animator for Germany's biggest video game studio. I worked on huge Hollywood-type productions with over 300 people, and I felt I was on top of the world. I had achieved all of my professional dreams, at least what the 10-year-old version of me thought my dreams were. Our studio, Crytek, was leading at the time in virtual reality development, which my inner nerd thought was super exciting stuff to be a part of. But something didn't feel quite right. And even though I tried to ignore it, I always had a voice telling me that maybe there was more to life for me than video games. So I started traveling whenever I had free time. I bought a secondhand camera from a friend and began taking photos. Photography became my new hobby, a new medium to channel my creativity and have lots of fun doing it without feeling the pressure to perform. In 2012, I traveled to Kenya to attend a college friend's wedding. And that trip changed everything for me. While I was there, I met some of the members of the Youth Arsenal football team. They were doing a social project, in a school in Kibera, which is Nairobi's biggest slum. I made friends with them and volunteered to take pictures of their activities. And after a few days at the school, the principal asked me if I wanted to teach a small group of teenagers how to take photos with the only camera that the school had. I, of course, accepted, and I spent the day with them teaching them everything I knew at the time, which in retrospect wasn't that much. It was such an enriching experience, and I was so grateful for the exchange that we had. We learned a lot from each other, and despite coming from very, very different backgrounds. After a few days later, I was traveling back to Germany. And during the flight, I was thinking about going back to the office the next day and getting back to work animating monsters and aliens. I still remember it as if it was yesterday. A really strong feeling of emptiness took over me. And I couldn't stop thinking that it was time for me maybe to make some changes in my life. Working in video games was my childhood dream. And after some years, I just didn't identify with that world or with the projects that I was making. I didn't even play video games. And actually, I was making violent games that I wouldn't want children to play. You see, I was brought up by my mother, a courageous photographer and human rights activist who evoked in me the importance of empathy and care for the human condition. I felt like I should use my creativity out in the real world instead of the virtual one. So I prepared myself for 1 year after that trip to Kenya. I went to photography workshops on weekends and read tons of books about photography. And in 2013, I quit my 10-year career in 3D animation and decided to follow my passion for photography. It was also thanks to my mom that I learned to love traveling and be curious about other worlds. Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, is a country in Southeast Asia next to Thailand, India, and China, which has been closed to the outside world for over 50 years. As one of the least traveled countries in the world, I was very drawn to its culture and age-old traditions. So that year, I packed my backpack with my 2 cameras and traveled to Myanmar to assist a photographer on his personal project. My trip was booked for a month, and I ended up staying for 2.5 years. I couldn't really put my finger on it, but I felt really inspired there. And for me, Myanmar felt kind of like a hidden gem. Now, believe me, leaving a comfortable life in Germany with a very stable job was definitely not an easy decision to make. But I followed my heart, and although it was scary, I stepped away from my comfort zone. And I can now tell you that it was one of the most rewarding experiences and decisions that I've ever made. So when I arrived in 2013, the country was in the process of slowly opening up after being isolated from the outside world. Everywhere you turn, the country felt as if it had been frozen in time. It's as if it had stayed in a past century or a different time period. In this image here, we see women from Shan State using shovels and their bare hands to build a road without any machinery at all. The Myanmar military wanted to control who had access to the outside world, so they made it impossible for anyone to afford any modern technology, including a mobile phone. I still remember buying my SIM card when I arrived for $350. And if I had arrived a year before that, I would have had to pay $1,000 just for the SIM card. However, the country was falling apart, and the regime realized that if they didn't allow for foreign investment, they would lose everything. So literally overnight, and right before my eyes, all aspects of life were changing at lightning speeds. In 2014, less than 1% of the people had access to the internet. But 1 year later, the average person had a smartphone and was signing up to Facebook. And that's a country of over 50 million people. It was the fastest turnover of internet accessibility in the history of humanity. After a few months doing small jobs photographing for local media outlets, I got my first opportunity as a photographer with the United Nations. Now, I remember I was so nervous before this job. Honestly, I doubted myself, wondering if I was good enough to deliver the quality that would be expected of me. So I basically had to convince myself and everyone around me that I knew exactly what I was doing. My job there was to travel for a month through villages in Myanmar, photographing infrastructure development projects in rural areas across the country. After the first day of traveling, we arrived in the town where we were going to spend the night. We were invited to have dinner at the village leader's home. We were all sitting around a large round table, which was on the floor, and the food was being served to us. The sun had just set as it was evening time. And that's when I realized I could barely see the food in front of us. There was a strange and odd feeling. Our host turned on kerosene lamps, and after a few moments, I started coughing, and feeling really dizzy from the fumes. Everyone around me laughed jokingly, as it was obvious that I wasn't used to breathing this kind of very toxic air. You see, the electricity grid never reached this village. I thought to myself, can you imagine for a moment cooking dinner, having your kids do their homework, or bathing in the dark? Well, as many as 1.2 billion people still live with no access to electricity today. That's almost 3 times the population of the Middle East living in the dark at night. Consider that for a second. After 2 weeks of visiting communities with no access to electricity, I met Mo Win, a 20-year-old farmer from the village in northern Myanmar. Mo Win and his family grow corn and have 3 cows which provide milk for extra income. They had recently acquired a solar powered system. And the way that works is, it's a small solar panel, like the one he has in his hand. He puts it on his roof, which charges a battery. And that battery is connected to 4 light bulbs, which give off light for 6 to 8 hours. Now, every day, Mo Win turns on the lights to milk his cows twice, once early in the morning and once in the evening. And that allows him more time to be on the field and to have other activities with his family. After getting to know one another, I asked him if I could photograph him with his favorite cow. He agreed, and it was nighttime, so the only lights available to shoot with were his solar light bulbs. I asked the few local friends to help me, and we set up this portrait. Now, did you guys know that enough sunlight falls on the Earth's surface every hour to meet the world energy demand for an entire year? Moment made me realize the potential that solar has to improve lives literally overnight. I became very passionate about this subject. And so for the last 5, almost 6 years, I've been traveling to different countries to photograph and tell stories of people whose lives have been impacted by solar technologies. Now I call this project Solar Portraits. What I do is I usually ask people how solar has impacted or changed their life in any way or shape or form. Then I set up a portrait in their environment to tell their story. I spent a long time developing a lighting technique using only these solar-powered light bulbs as the fountain of illumination. And I use this to define the visual language throughout the series. It's funny, my mother mentioned to me that the solar portraits have an otherworldly feel to them, almost like a video game. Of course, that wasn't my intention, but that actually makes sense. You know, my eye has been trained for many years to study animation and create fantasy worlds. So it's no wonder that this work may reflect my last career. And actually, I love that because it's part of my voice. It's my signature as an artist. In this image here, we see men in the state of Odisha in India, and they're fishing in a mud pond with these cones that you see. Now, well, the way that works is that they walk inside of the mud, and whenever they see bubbles, they throw the cone inside of the mud and they put their hand through the cone and grab the fish with their bare hand. Pretty cool, right? Now, do you guys see the moon above the fisherman over the head of the gentleman there? Well, actually, I'm tricking you guys. It's actually a solar light bulb. Like in the games that I was making before, I like to play with the elements in some of the scenes that I photograph to create unique visual illusions. Now, this project, Solar Portraits, changed my career forever. It won many international awards and was my first assignment for National Geographic magazine. It's been such an honor to be such a part of a legendary institution from early on in my photography career. Since then, the project has continued to grow. I've worked on it so far in 9 countries, and I've created a nonprofit organization which teaches sustainability to students with the communities that we work with. Now, our goal is to inspire the next generations to work towards a healthier planet. But that's a story for another day. Now, did you guys know that solar is literally saving lives? I'm not sure if you're aware of the Venezuelan crisis that's been going on since 2014, where over 2.5 million people have fled the country in search for a better life. Now, these families, they're with elderly people, with infants, they leave everything behind, and they walk for thousands of kilometers with barely any money in their pockets and barely any bags with clothes or anything. They usually walk through Colombia, trying to get to Peru or to Ecuador, and many of them even walk at night. There's an NGO called Operation Blessing, and they were handing out these small solar lanterns to the Venezuelan migrants. And last year, I was in Pamplona in Colombia, working with this organization. I wanted to document the dangerous journey that thousands of families are taking every single day. Here on this picture, we see a group of young men who've taken the decision to walk through the night for about 5 to 6 hours to try to get to the next shelter. As you see here, they have these solar lanterns that they've strapped to their chest and their backs, because many cars were running people over and hitting them at night. So thanks to these lights, not only can they see, but more importantly, other cars can see them. Now, this photo might tell you that story, but in a world where we're so bombarded with imagery, it's really hard to engage with people to make them really stop and pay attention. For me, as an artist, the challenge is to find innovative ways to get a message across and hopefully make the audience feel something. So using many of the same skills from my past career, I created a 360 virtual reality film to take you in and try to show you what it must be like to risk your life walking for hours at night along extremely dangerous conditions. The user can move the camera by looking around, so it really feels like you're part of the story and you're there in first person. I'm going to show you guys a little example.
Pero vale, las lucecitas alumbra, ¿eh?
Mira, si te para una gandola de eso, lo llamas a cámara y
So I've shown this film in the United Nations, and they've expressed interest in continuing this type of initiative, handing out more of these lanterns to the Venezuelan migrants. So that alone makes this work for me worthwhile. And this was in 2019, which honestly feels like another lifetime ago, doesn't it? 2020 has been a very challenging year for humanity for so many reasons. Of course, with the COVID-19 pandemic affecting most, if not all of the planet. I live in Mexico City, which is where I am currently. And when everything started shutting down in February, I feared for the worst. Here, 60% of the people are informal workers. That means that if they don't earn their day's wages, they may not be able to put food on the table. And as you might have figured out by now, I'm used to traveling for most of the work that I do. But because of the pandemic, I lost all of my assignments, and my public speaking dates, they were all either canceled or postponed for the foreseeable future. The first 6 weeks, I stayed at home, puzzled and confused as to what was really going on. With so many uncertainties and contradictions that we were being told every day, it's pretty easy to feel worried and upset. So one of the ways that I stayed sane at home was by making personal photo projects. I began studying my environment and was making still lifes with plant and food. I guess you can say that I had too much time in my hands. However, it was quite therapeutic to take a step back, slow down, and filter out the noise. Days turned into weeks, and the more time passed, I constantly read about the hardships that people were going through in my community. I actually began feeling more and more anxious and thought that I should get out there and try to tell a story from right here in Mexico City. Now, have you ever heard of the mariachi musicians? The mariachi are a globally recognized cultural icon whose music is representative of Mexico and its people. Mexicans can rely on mariachi music to express feelings, depict everyday life, and honor Mexican history. The songs that they sing are very heartfelt and emotional. They talk about passion, love, and of course, heartbreak. Mexicans usually hire mariachis for any social events such as weddings, baptisms, and birthdays. Now, ever since I moved to Mexico, I've been fascinated by their music and their extravagant outfits, and actually also how passionately this country really connects with them. I come from Andalusia, which is in the south of Spain, and that's where flamenco music comes from. And although both genres sound very differently in melody, the emotions that they both convey are very similar and speak to me. There are a few mariachi songs which still give me goosebumps every time I hear them. I began going to Plaza Garibaldi, which is just about 10 minutes away from my house. Now, Garibaldi is a square that is historically famous, where the mariachi have been playing for more than 75 years. Normally, it's a place full of energy where people from all walks of life come to socialize, dance, and listen to live music. But now, the square was eerily empty every time I went. I had definitely never seen it so quiet. The only people that I would normally find there was either an odd musician on his own or surreal scenes like this one where men in protective suits were disinfecting surfaces using chemicals. Now, one day, I met Raimundo. He's a 74-year-old mariachi who's been playing in the square for almost 50 years. He has literally seen it all. However, he told me quite emotionally that day that he had never lost so much work because of the pandemic. He was there alone since he didn't have anyone to play with. All of his band members had left to their hometowns outside of Mexico City because they feared for their safety and they couldn't earn enough money to really survive. Now, after listening to Raimundo, I decided to tell their story of the mariachi musicians. The mariachi are considered informal workers, just as the 60% of the population that I just mentioned earlier. They go out in the street every day to try to find clients to play their music to. They have no employer or government support whatsoever. With the new government restrictions in place due to COVID, there were hundreds of jobless musicians vying for work. Dozens of them waiting, as you see here on this picture, on the main avenue, almost stepping in front of traffic in hopes to find a job. And as time passed, people's savings were quickly running out. Although the mariachi are considered to be the main part of the country's cultural heritage, it's been very challenging for these proud musicians who feel they've been forgotten and left behind by their government. Now, if there's one thing that I love about Mexico, is that Mexicans have a strong sense of community and they really look out for each other during hard times. While many mariachi were struggling to make ends meet, local grassroots organizations made up of largely low-income community members mobilized, collecting food donations to create rations. Their faces said it all. It was clear that none of these musicians could have ever imagined in a million years that they would ever be lining up to get a small bag of rice or pasta to feed their families. After 1 month working in Garibaldi at the Mariachi Square, I met some young men who have a nonprofit organization. They were interviewing a few musicians for an initiative that they call Salvemos al Mariachi, which in Spanish language means let's save the mariachi. We got to talking and came up with an idea together. I thought to myself, since nobody is supposed to leave their house or travel, how cool could it be if we could teleport people right to Garibaldi Square? If we could take them there and really feel like they're attending a personal live mariachi concert, all from the comfort of their own home. So we created a platform where people could order a real mariachi band and send dedicated personalized songs as gifts to loved ones around the world. One could order anywhere from one song to even a 30-minute concert. And then I created a YouTube channel where I posted dozens and dozens of songs that people were ordering from all over the world. There are millions of Mexicans who are quarantined in other countries, and many of them haven't seen their own family members in years. So through this platform, they were able to dedicate songs to them and send them across the globe. Again, using my skills from my prior life, I decided to create 360 videos as the gifts so that the audience would have a much more immersive experience. I'm going to show you an example here as well.
Esta bonita canción va dedicada para Juana de parte de su hija Asunción, con mucho cariño.
Para Sam, esperando que sus 30 le traigan lo mejor del mundo, de parte de Stephanie.
Para ti, March, de parte de Rachel.
Para Obdulia y Bernardo, de parte de Aurelien, y que vivan los novios.
Para Lola, de parte de Steve.
Felicidades de parte de Che. Claro que sí, claro que sí, claro que sí, claro que sí, claro que sí. Venga.
Money raised was used to support over 400 mariachi families. Now, these are folks that do not want to be given any freebies out of pity. And with this project, we were able to facilitate for these musicians to continue working in a dignified way. I believe the initiative was made at the right time, when what we need the most is to connect to those people that we love. I also gifted a mariachi song myself to my family in Spain, which I didn't get to go visit this year for the very first time in my life. As you can see here, my mariachi friends insisted that I sing along with them. You know, I feel very grateful that they allowed me into their lives. I've learned so much from their will to overcome the obstacles that life throws at them. Now, recently, when I was publishing the work in a Korean magazine, and I was interviewed, they asked me about the bravery that I had for quitting a successful career and a stable life to go into photography, who, for those who don't know, is actually a very difficult profession to make a good living in these days. I answered that actually, I didn't think I was brave at all. I actually had a very big safety net. I always told myself that if after a year I decided that I didn't enjoy taking photos as much as I thought I did, or if I didn't see that it would be possible to live from my photography, I already had a successful career that I could always go back to. And going into photography in my 30s and not straight out of university allowed me to address challenges in a more thoughtful and engaged way. I never would have thought that what I learned throughout my video game career could be so valuable in my current one. You know, it's allowed me to tell stories in unique ways that hopefully have left a positive impact in other people's lives. And that's something that gives purpose to the work that I do. Now, I honestly think that things would have gone very differently, and I wouldn't be where I am today had I gone into photography earlier without much life experience under my belt. Making life changes when something doesn't feel right anymore and turning it into something positive is something that we all have the power to do. And sure, it isn't always easy. In fact, it can be super scary at times. But facing challenges head on and believing in oneself is key to finding fulfillment. Applying life experiences into new adventures is exciting because as the world is ever changing, so are we. And this may sound cheesy, but the only thing that is truly important is enjoying walking along the path and not the end result. You know, I feel so lucky to have gotten to follow that little boy's dreams. But it was also important to accept that as we grow older and we change, it's very natural that our dreams do too. And as long as you listen to your instincts and are honest to yourself, then the concept of failure doesn't even exist. It's actually just an enriching lesson which you will take along with you on this wonderful journey that is life. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating information and, as expected, amazing pictures. We do have a few questions for you if you don't mind.
Of course, of course.
The first one, how can we encourage students to use technology that they have available, such as mobile phones or cameras, to record and share their experience? Or do you think that they need more expensive technical equipment?
That's a good question. No, I don't think that needing expensive equipment is actually important at all. I've worked with communities who have very, very old phones with not very modern cameras, and it's not about how great the technology is. It's about how you use it and what you do with it. And using something like a mobile phone camera, I take a lot of pictures myself with a mobile phone and even publish them sometimes. The important thing is to try to capture things that move you, that mean something to you, and to find a purpose. And so if there's something that you really are interested in and fascinated in, your children, your students, whoever, allow them to express themselves and to capture moments and to use, no matter what the tool is. But the important thing is that they get into a habit to use the phone in this case, or the camera, as a tool of expression, as a tool of creating something that they can then share with somebody else and maybe even tell a story. So no, I think it's not important at all how expensive or how fancy equipment is.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, it's so true how, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And sometimes, some of our words are worth 1,000 pictures, right? We can capture so many things to share our ideas. The second question, just personally, what are some of the most interesting places that you have photographed?
Ooh, that's a very challenging question. I've been very, very lucky to have seen and been in very interesting and great places. There is an island on the coast of Kenya. It's called Lamu. It's a very small island. Everything is white. All of the architecture is white. There are no cars on the island, so everyone either walks or goes along with donkeys. So it's full of little cute donkeys, and it's just one of the most charming and mesmerizing places I've ever been to. I recommend you check it out.
That's fascinating.
And by the way, I have never been to Bahrain, and I'm, again, very, very fascinated to go there one day.
Well, we hope to have you here and we can continue the conversation. I'm sure the students would really benefit from your experiences, and we love the National Geographic learning curriculum. So it would be great to have you. Final question.
Thank you so much. Yes.
For students who are interested in photography, what would you recommend as some of the skills that they need to develop to really be able to promote and present their art?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great question. In my case, for example, I learned photography on my own, right? So the technical skills of learning how to use the camera is something that honestly we can learn very easily, either by going to photography workshops or even online. There's so much information out there on YouTube. There are great tutorials where you can learn the basics of the technical aspects, because that's kind of the more challenging part of it at first. But once you get used to, once the technical is no longer an obstacle and you use it just like you would use a pen to write, once you don't have to think so much about the technical aspects, that's when you can really begin to develop your voice and express your creativity through using that tool, right? So to do that, I would very much suggest to read and look at many photography books and read and study the masters of photography, the people that have come before us who have really developed this tool into such a unique and creative medium, and really just study what other people have done in the past and what they're doing today. I think it's very important to, and again, there's a plethora of information online, and also go to your local bookstore and check out photography books and just see what photography moves you, what you like about it, and ask yourself a lot of questions. Why do you like a certain image? Why do you like a certain artist? And try to figure out why that may be, and try to incorporate elements of it into your own work.
Yeah, that's an excellent idea. I remember when I was in college exploring the art of Ansel Adams and just his incredible black and white photography in winter. So some of these things are fascinating. Yeah, excellent. That's a great suggestion. Well, thanks so much for such a thought-provoking and insightful presentation. We really appreciate your time and your energy.
Thank you very, very much to have me, and I hope to see you in person soon.
Thank you. That would be wonderful. Welcome. Come to Bahrain.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.